way back in March of 2020, I was, like a lot of you, I'm sure, frantically sorting through a load of new information about a very scary, quickly escalating virus. And I distinctly remember having conversations with family members who were either completely flipping their shit or repeating the "it's no worse than the flu" line, which I must take pains to point out was the worst when said by people who also didn't think the flu was a big deal, which it is. But I digress. I recall in those early days that one of my family members said that they had read somewhere that COVID-19 was airborne. I pointed out to them that, according to experts, no, it was not airborne. It was primarily spread via surfaces, which is why, at the time, it was so important to wash your hands and stop touching your face. Well, that turned out to not be true. First came the healthy debate over what scientists mean when they say airborne compared to what the general public means when they say airborne. The difference being that when scientists talk about it, there's no clear dividing line between something that is airborne and not airborne. It's a spectrum. With many viruses, they cling to droplets that you expel through your nose and mouth. Some viruses can cling to and continue to be infectious while clinging to much smaller droplets compared to other viruses. Measles is one such example of an airborne virus. Smaller droplets stay in the air for longer periods of time, meaning that if someone with measles sneezes in a room and then leaves the room, and you walk into that room 2 full hours later, those droplets might still be floating around and could still infect you. That's why measles is so dangerous. COVID-19 is not that infectious, luckily, but over the first few weeks after the pandemic fully bloomed in the United States, researchers came to realize that it was more airborne than they originally estimated. Technically, organizations like the CDC still point out that COVID-19 is not airborne in the proper scientific sense, since droplets don't hang around in the air with the ability to infect for several hours. You need close contact in order to contract COVID-19, meaning that you need to be near a person who is already positive for the virus in order for it to jump over to you. So the experts were wrong when they first stated that transmission was primarily via surfaces, and therefore I was wrong to repeat that when I repeated that. And yet, while I regret not being clearer with my family about the scientific definition of airborne, I do not regret being wrong because I trusted the experts. Sometimes the experts are wrong, but I guarantee that that is a rarer situation than when a random person on Facebook is wrong. My friend Katie Mack, who is an amazing astrophysicist, put it nicely when she recently tweeted, "There's a disconnect around the concept of consensus in science. People say science would never advance if we trusted consensus. The point is, consensus is the best info experts have. If you're outside the field, take it. Because within the field, we challenge it constantly." I touched on this in a video I did last year where I deconstructed a very misleading viral Medium post by a marketer named Aaron Jin, who was spreading some spectacularly bad science that did not age well at all. Here's what I said back then. Tip 1 is know your source. In this case, the author is Aaron Jin, who is a Silicon Valley marketing guy. Does that mean that he's wrong? No. But you do need to ask yourself this: what does the scientific consensus have to say about this issue, and what is this author arguing? In this case, the consensus of epidemiologists are telling us that COVID-19 is an emergency pandemic that needs to be mitigated by extreme measures to prevent significant loss of human life. The author is arguing that COVID-19 isn't that big of a deal and we shouldn't bother doing things like sheltering in place. If the author of this piece was an epidemiologist, you would want to read his dissenting opinion carefully. If the author of this piece is a former writer for Breitbart with no previous expertise in science, you would want to read it with extreme skepticism. Think of it this way. Most physicists think that dark matter exists. If a respected physicist wrote a paper about an alternative hypothesis that involves modifying general relativity, it might be worth your time to read. But if your accountant writes a paper on that same subject, you would be forgiven for finding better things to do with your time because it's probably going to take a theoretical physicist to point out all of the things that are wrong. And so on this topic, I would love to give a shout out to a Republican politician. I know it's been so long. Former governor of California, Arnold Schwarzenegger, who honestly, I think I prefer to the current Democratic governor, Gavin Newsom, who is just some kind of wealthy robot man who seems to make bad decisions. Schwarzenegger recently posted a video on his Facebook page showing him getting vaccinated against COVID-19. A brief aside, a lot of people have been angry about politicians getting vaccinated early on in this process, especially those politicians who spent the past year telling us that COVID isn't a big deal, which is not Schwarzenegger. But I'm not one of those people. Not only do I think that every new vaccination is a good vaccination because that is one less disease vector, but also famous people getting vaccinated leads to a larger uptake in vaccinations in the general public. Just like when Elvis was very prominently vaccinated for polio in front of a large media presence. It helps. Like, people look up to these people when they see them getting vaccinated. It makes them more likely to get vaccinated too. Anyway, Schwarzenegger is 73 and therefore he is in the high-risk category that is currently eligible for vaccines anyway. And it appears that he waited in line for it with everyone else, which is cool as shit. But I say all of this just to head off the whining. Yes, I know he's rich and famous. He still deserves to get vaccinated anyway. And I'm very glad that he posted a video of it on Facebook. Because it's Facebook, the replies to the video included, there were a lot of people that were very happy about him doing this, but there were some very upset vaccine denialists, saying, "I hope nothing bad will happen to you, cry face. I will not take the vaccine. I love you, Arnold, as a hero." And wow, the actual Terminator is scared of a cold. Good try, Arnold. We know you were put up to this to make the sheep think it's cool to be vaccinated. Most celebrities would never bother to read comments left for them on Facebook, let alone reply to them. But Schwarzenegger does. And he had a very, very good reply that I would like to read to you now. And as a favor to you, I will not read it in my pitch perfect Arnold Schwarzenegger impersonation voice. I always say you should know your strengths and listen to the experts. If you want to learn about building biceps, listen to me. Because I've spent my life studying how to get the perfect peak, and I have been called the greatest bodybuilder of all time. We all have different specialties. Dr. Fauci and all of the virologists and epidemiologists and doctors have studied diseases and vaccines for their entire lives. So I listen to them and I urge you to do the same. None of us are going to learn more than them by watching a few hours of videos. It's simple. If your house is on fire, you don't go on YouTube, you call the damn fire department. If you have a heart attack, you don't check your Facebook group, you call an ambulance. If 9 doctors tell you have cancer and need to treat it or you'll die, and 1 doctor says the cancer will disappear, you should always side with the 9. In this case, virtually all of the real experts around the world are telling us the vaccine is safe, and some people on Facebook are saying it isn't. In general, I think if the circle of people you trust gets smaller and smaller, and you find yourself more and more isolated, it should be a warning sign that you're going down a rabbit hole of misinformation. Some people say it is weak to listen to experts. That's bogus. It takes strength to admit that you don't know everything. Weakness is thinking you don't need expert advice and only listening to sources that confirm what you want to believe. Holy shit. Did Arnold Schwarzenegger miss his true calling as a science communicator? Because that reply is amazing. He explained scientific consensus. He explained why you should trust the experts. And he even finished by encouraging people to leave their echo chambers. And he did it all on Facebook, which is the worst possible place for all of this to be happening. And he did it while referencing the very reason why so many people listen to him, his physical strength. That is just masterful polemics. Arnold knows, and he points out in this very reply, that building muscle doesn't make him more qualified to speak on this issue than anyone else. But he still manages to reference it because so many of these science denialists reject masks and vaccines as a weakness. It's not. And while they won't listen to puny weaklings like Dr. Fauci, they might listen to a big, strong man who has never been accused of being weak. Remember a few weeks ago when I talked about political polarization and how it isn't always a bad thing and sometimes your political opponents really are ignorant and immoral? Well, please note for the record that I would absolutely vote for Republican Arnold Schwarzenegger for whatever office he wants to run for, though he's sadly ineligible to run for president due to being born abroad. And those researchers wouldn't even have had to pay me to switch my vote.